Hello everyone, it's been a while since I've done one of these collection videos, and recently the To the Journey look back at Star Trek Voyager documentary came out and it inspired me to do one that I've never done before, which is a look at our collection of documentaries. Now, with a movie and TV collection as large as what we have and all special editions, there are of course hundreds, actually thousands of examples of behind-the-scenes featurettes and commentaries and mini documentaries and full-fledged documentaries included in a lot of sets. And one of my favorites is MASH, which takes the finale Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen. It has hours of documentaries and special features and stuff at the end. It would be like going through the special features of everything we own to talk about those. I'm really gonna limit this more to the documentaries that I have in the collection for their own right. Don't have them just because they're in a set of something that we own, but I really specifically wanted that documentary. And I love watching documentaries, and I watch a lot of documentaries, both on cable. When I was a kid growing up, it was a huge thing. I actually really enjoyed when we'd watch documentaries in school. It was a lot of fun. I watched a lot of PBS. It's the kind of thing, though, where a lot of documentaries I watch one or twice. They're really informative. It's a lot of fun. But for me to want to actually physically own an individual separate release of a documentary, it has to be something special that I'm going to come back to again and again. So we're going to get in here, go through two kind of larger kind of collections, like categories within this category, and then get into more of the wider variety with the different formats. And since I mentioned the Voyager documentary, and it is by far the largest sort of category within the category, we'll start with Star Trek, one of my favorites, Trekkies. Absolutely love this joyful look at the fandom. I've watched it at least once a year ever since the VHS tape released, like constantly. So we have that on VHS and DVD, and then when they had the 25th anniversary, the Blu-ray edition, absolutely love Trekkies. Seen it so many times. And then Trekkies 2. Trekkies 2 is an interesting one that I feel like not as many people have seen this follow-up. At least I never hear people really talk or quote this one quite as much as Trekkies. It's a little bit more of a look at the international aspect of the fandom, looking at that a little more closely in the same kind of vein and style of Trekkies. I don't like it as much as the original. It's kind of a classic, and I quote this all the time. Trekkies, to the annoyance of some people probably in my life, but Trekkies 2 is still a fun one to check out if you really enjoy Trekkies, so I like that one. And also on VHS we have the Star Trek Adventure, which is the Universal Studios set tour. These were tapes that were around in the very early 90s as TNG was really getting going and Star Trek was coming back into the forefront. And then getting to the end of TNG, we have Journey's End, the saga of Star Trek Next Generation. Really enjoy this one. And William Shatner's Star Trek Memories. The many looks at the original series. And of course, the many other Shatner productions. We have William Shatner's Get a Life, another look at the fandom. One of my favorite interview, kind of just one-on-one conversational documentaries. We have Mind Meld, Secrets Behind the Voyage of a Lifetime. It's William Shatner really just kind of sitting down with Leonard Nimoy and talking about their experiences in Star Trek and really life's journey as a whole. And this one really stands out even more after Leonard's death, and it's phenomenal, one that I really like to look back on. And the Captain's Collection Blu-ray set. This includes a bunch of different documentaries, of course, as The Captains, which is fantastic, and one of the few times that we get to have an interview with Avery Brooks. You really don't get a whole lot with him. He's not been very active in that aspect, so it's cool to see all the captains. It's a fun little sit-downs, and the captains' close-up interviews, Chaos on the Bridge, which is the story of the Next Generation, bringing that to the screen. That's one that's also included in some of the TNG like box sets, and just the insanity of trying to bring Star Trek back to television, what it was like, particularly in those early years with TNG. And then it also includes Shatner's Get a Life, unforgettable love letter to the fans of Star Trek. And this set also has a bunch of additional stuff, which is why I like that Blu-ray collection. And then we have an Adam Nimoy film, For the Love of Spock. Again, one that really hits home after the passing. So it's really one that's heartfelt and an interesting look into that, as well as the restoration of the original Enterprise model and captain's chair and all kinds of really cool stuff with this Smithsonian Channel building Star Trek. And I like how they did this because it is partially about the finding and restoration for display of some really important pieces of Star Trek history, and then going into like why are these things really important, looking at their cultural impact. And of course the most recent Star Trek Voyager documentary. This is the Backers edition for that from the same people. It's also the Backers edition of looking back at Star Trek Deep Space Nine, What We Left Behind. My favorite Star Trek series, Deep Space Nine. And then also on Blu-ray, I kind of consider this more, and includes a bunch of episodes of the original series in the Roddenberry Vault, but I include this a little bit more in the documentary section because that's why I really have this. There's 12 episodes are in this set, but they're 12 episodes that I have on DVD and Blu-ray multiple times over. There have some fan favorite ones, things like The City on the Edge of Forever. I think at one point that's included in so many sets that I think I might have 12 copies of that episode. So that's not really why I own this. This is more about all the feature documentaries that go into inside the Roddenberry Vault, multi-part glimpse at classic episodes, new angles and perspectives, revisiting a classic and visualizing the fantastic, just all kinds of behind-the-scenes documentary stuff that goes with this set is really why I have this. Then to finally finish off Star Trek and move into some other stuff, we have some of the anniversary documentaries. The 25th anniversary special, really loved this one. Remember seeing that on TV, as well as this was a huge live event. The 30 years and beyond, the 30th anniversary. This was, I remember like the whole family sitting down, and it was being on the phone then with a couple relatives that were watching it. Like, it was a big deal. It's a huge live TV event for Star Trek. All the fanfare and stuff that is hard to imagine now if you just are kind of growing up with Star Trek now. We have from the History Channel the 50th anniversary, look back at Star Trek, and then Center Seat, the 55th anniversary look, and they just announced for the 60th anniversary a Center Seat 2, so another series that is coming out. As well as there's a new Shatner Star Trek related documentary coming out later this year as well, so those will be ones to look out for. So this is the Star Trek documentary collection for now. Next up we have Marilyn Monroe. On Laserdisc we have Marilyn Say Goodbye to the President. Which is actually a Japanese release, but it is fully in English. And then also on Laserdisc we have Remembering Marilyn. Another Japanese Laserdisc that's all in English though. Then on DVD there's a double pack with Hometown Story. We have Hollywood Remembers Marilyn. Look back at the life of Marilyn Monroe. Is particularly more focused on her movie career though. And one of my favorites, we have Marilyn Monroe, The Final Days. This is from the Marilyn Monroe Diamond Collection. It's all about the work on that final incomplete project, Something's Got to Give, which is a remake of one of my favorite comedies of all time, My Favorite Wife. And a look at all those troubling final days in the life of Marilyn Monroe. And then from the Cinema Classics collection, different edition of The Final Days, which also includes some Fox Movie Tone news, so some slightly different features in that edition. as well as in this timeline historical series. This is really interesting. I've found a bunch of these over the years, and they're really fun little windows into a specific year, but most of them are just kind of worth watching once out of curiosity. They take a lot of memorable news and pop culture moments from a specific year and just sort of talk about them and show surviving footage. And this is from 1962 and has information on the death. Right here we have Morgan Beatty, Monroe found dead. So look into 1962. As well as this is a 5 documentary collection all about what I love most, classic Hollywood. Really fun to get into. There's a couple of different ones, but it also includes the legend of Marilyn Monroe, so I kind of included it here. And she also is in a couple of these other ones with Hollywood the Golden Years, Hollywood the Great Stars, Hollywood the Selznick Years, and Hollywood the Gift of Laughter. Really think that one's a lot of fun. This is a really cool 5 documentary collection. And we'll finish off the movie and TV related stuff before getting into some of the more history and nature related documentaries. We have 2 somewhat bizarre documentaries on my favorite actor of all time, Peter Sellers. We have The Ghost of Peter Sellers. This is really interesting. A comic tragic feature doc about what it takes to be a film director and survive your biggest disaster, which is Peter Sellers himself, and all about this failed attempt to make this pirate comedy and towards the tail end of Peter Sellers' life, and getting into really the nitty-gritty of what it was like to work with Peter Sellers when he was really at his worst. And it's an interesting look into this particular production, but then also into the life of Peter Sellers. And he's an actor he's someone who just as a person is very complicated, and I feel like to get a really good, interesting, complete picture of him, I would really watch commentaries about his movies, read a really good biography that I have, one of my favorite books of all time about him. It really gives one perspective, and then a few things like this where you have like The Ghost of Peter Sellers, which is very much in a negative but realistic light looking at him, and the utterly bizarre The Life and Death of Peter Sellers with Jeffrey Rush as Peter Sellers. And this is an interesting look at his life, but the majority of this is an HBO thing. It is portrayals of very specific moments in his life covering the span of his career. So it's a documentary, but at the same time it also plays out those moments like little vignettes, and it's very bizarre, and I kind of would have preferred just a straight documentary, but I also like this because the oddity and the insanity of it and the disparate personalities and things, it fits the vibe of who Peter Sellers was also. So it's kind of it's a mixed bag. It's a weird experience, but those I really like. Then we also have one of my other favorite actors. This is Jackie Chan, My Stunts. This is a fantastic documentary looking at the stunt work of Jackie Chan. On Laserdisc again, we have this Ingrid. It's a Japanese Laserdisc again, but it's the look back at Ingrid Bergman, her filmography, and really just kind of a fun look at her career. This Hollywood documentary, as well as this multi-disc set. We have Buster Keaton, A Hard Act to Follow. Laserdisc. Gatefold. 3 sections. We have From Vaudeville to the Movies, Star Without a Studio, and Genius Recognized. It's a fun one to dig into if you like Buster Keaton. Which I do. I've always been a little bit more of a Buster Keaton fan than a Charlie Chaplin, but my favorite overall would be Harold Lloyd. So really like a lot of movies and stuff from that era. We get into Louise Brooks, Looking for Lulu. Also have a really cool Claire Bow documentary. It's part of, again, just in like a DVD set, Looking for the It Girl. So I really am a big fan of Louise Brooks and Claire Bow. Mary Pickford, The Muse of the Movies. Nick and Nora is 2 documentaries. I'm a big fan of the Thin Man movies, in particular, and then also just individually I really like William Powell, so I have a documentary here with him, A True Gentleman, and Myrna Loy, one of the all-time great actresses. So Nice to Come Home. Lots of cool special features in that too. It's a real fun set if you like them. And Behind the Planet of the Apes, I've revisited this documentary so many times. I saw this first on TV, when the first time I ever saw the Planet of the Apes movies was a TV marathon some point in the 90s, and I stayed up late one summer night, literally just didn't go to bed. Well, I think it was like 4 in the morning by the time this documentary was over, because I marathoned all the original movies. Loved them. I was just so engaged, and then this documentary came on. I was like, oh my gosh, that was incredible. So this is a real fun look back at those movies, the whole Planet of the Apes franchise up to that time. One of the funniest documentaries of all time, Electric Boogaloo, story of Canon Films. This is so entertaining. This is fantastic, especially if you are someone who's watched a ton of 80s movies like I have. Just grew up, renting whatever 80s movies I could get my hands on, or VHS back in the day, and just one of my favorite eras. So Canon Films is a really great documentary about them, and related to that, a series of documentaries all about largely 80s movies. We have In Search of the Last Action Hero. And these are fantastic, and they're incredibly long, always like several hours. A lot of fun, really well done. Search of the Last Action Hero. And then we have, they've done a bunch of these now, covering, I think they're into like the 90s and other eras, but we have the original In Search of Darkness, looking at horror movies from that era, and when you pre-ordered to get different editions, this is my Elvira, Mistress of the Dark Collector's Edition, journey into iconic 80s horror. And my favorite of the trio, we have In Search of Tomorrow, the definitive 80s sci-fi documentary. This is a blast. It is very long, it's 300 minutes, and it is well worth digging into. I mean, there's a lot there. It's really, I can't believe how much is on this one. It's easily my favorite, and really just a fun one to break up into pieces too. Like, it's hard to watch the whole thing all at once, it's a lot of time, but then finding specific segments or interviews that you've never seen before, maybe get a different glimpse into my favorite genre and one of my favorite time periods. And then switching a little more over to TV, of course, many TV box sets have tons of documentaries and interviews and behind the scenes. Those are largely in those, but a few that I've grabbed individually over the time because they were just real standouts. We have The Fantasy Worlds of Irwin Allen. I love this because I am a big fan of Irwin Allen, especially his 60s TV shows. Standout for me is Lost in Space. I've always been a big Lost in Space fan, but I like all of them, have them all on DVD. So this is a really cool look back on those. I was just re-watching Land of the Giants recently. And then this PBS documentary, we have Pioneers of Television, late night sitcoms, game shows, and variety. And the Pioneers of Television kind of ties in with the getting to more of the history-related documentaries. It really isn't a time period in history that I dislike studying. I want to know as much as possible and just endlessly curious, but when it comes down to my favorite eras to explore, it really has to be the turn of the 19th century through the 20th century into like the very beginnings of the 21st century. Is that period or so, maybe 120, 130 years, that is where I just gravitate towards. So looking at a lot of the documentaries that we have that I go back to, we start off with The Gilded Age, nice PBS documentary about the closing decades of the 19th century. The Great War. I've always felt like in school in particular, whether it's even in high school or in college, the focus was really on World War II, understandably, but I felt like it was weighed a little too heavily. I always found World War I to be something that I think I've gravitated towards wanting to know more about, just because I feel like growing up, I didn't get as much exposure to the story of what happened in that time period in comparison to World War II. And I think part of that was just because, especially growing up, the Nazis were such a huge part of then the pop culture even of the time. It was something that was just always there. You can grow up with Indiana Jones, whatever. The Nazis was sort of this ever-present thing. And you just really didn't get quite as much with World War One. Really like the 20s and 30s. It's the time period that is some of my, you can see some of my like movie related stuff. Time period I really like too is we have here the Golden 20s, a lively look at that roaring decade. A couple of bonus features as well. From Dust Bowl to Tinseltown, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? This is fantastic. This is one that I really recommend. If you're interested in the 20s and 30s, these are two I think are worth picking up to look at. And one of my favorites to revisit, I like Ken Burns documentaries, fascinated by the time period, but this Prohibition one, I don't know what it is about it. For some reason, I find it to be infinitely rewatchable. I have it in a case here and have it on Blu-ray. I've gone through it multiple times and I find it to be just a fascinating 6-hour watch to dig back into. And another PBS American experience with the crash of 1929. This is really good pairing with Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? Some box sets. We have Roosevelt's An Intimate History. Big Ken Burns set. It's a 7-disc set. As well as this PBS Gold kind of mega set, all about New York. This is a huge collection, 7 episodes starting from 1609 all the way through present day, going all about the area and the history of what would become New York City. So fascinating. I really love this huge box set. Fly With Me, another PBS American experience. I think traveling to visit family abroad was something that made me just kind of interesting in air travel and the kind of glory days, Pan Am and the stewardesses. Well, it was always something that I always found fascinating, and this is a really good documentary. It tells the story of pioneering young women who became flight attendants at a time when single women were unable to order a drink, eat alone in a restaurant, own a credit card, or get a prescription for birth control. So becoming stewardess was something that was seen as an opportunity for travel, glamour, adventure, and independence, and just kind of a cool look at that culture of the time. And we're going to switch this is a great sort of bridge between history and nature, because the National Parks, America's Best Idea, looks at national parks where it's just sort of scenic overviews to music, and you get a little bit of information about the parks, and those are always fascinating. This is great because it has some of that, but it's largely about the actual path that we took to the formation and the history behind the formation of all of the different national parks in the U.S. So it's a large, almost 13-hour set, and it's really fun. I actually rewatched this recently. It's great to dig into each section, which is separated into a set of years. I guess it's 1915 to 1919, just kind of looking at the history of the national parks. And so it's a double dose of fascinating information, because you get a look at all the individual parks and get to kind of really explore, and then it digs into a lot of the history of what's kind of going on at the time as well. You get a lot of the context and historical perspective as to why these parks were formed and what it was going on politically or socially at the time, and the rise and fall of attendance, and the formation and then changing rules of what is a national park, what's okay there, what's not, and how do we manage them. And it's definitely something that if you are interested in either aspect, whether it is the side of exploring and preserving nature, or if you're interested in just kind of learning about those time periods in history and something that was an important element of what was going on at those times, it's a fun watch. It's really good. It's one of my favorite Ken Burns. We also have on the nature side of things on Laserdisc, the national parks again. We have the Great National Parks. This is a look at Yosemite, Grand Canyon, and Yellowstone. It's a multi-part documentary, as well as has a lot of those just kind of look at the scenery elements as a flybys with music and history of those three parks in particular. A National Geographic Born of Fire. This is really cool. Experience the awesome power of Earth's destructive forces. Volcanoes. One that I just kind of randomly found years ago. That was kind of cool to have that on Laserdisc. And around the same time, I found this one as well, probably from someone's collection or library or something. We have the National Zoo, the Zoo Behind the Zoo. Smithsonian Laserdisc collection. That's kind of cool to have one from that collection. It's the only one I ever really found from that. The National Zoo. So those are kind of interesting ones that I love finding stuff like this on Laserdisc. And one that's hard to place because it is all over the place. We have the series In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, the complete collection, all 144 classic episodes. If you're unfamiliar with this series, every episode is sort of a mini documentary looking at a bunch of different topics, and anything from very mainstream science to things that are considered to be more maybe related to mysticism or pseudoscience, and just all over the place. Again, one of my favorites in here is the Death of Marilyn Monroe, because it gets into more of the conspiracy theory element, but there's some that are a little more focused on historical events and stick more to stuff that's kind of established factual information. But then you get stuff like Bermuda Triangle, Bigfoot. It's fascinating. It covers a lot of topics. That's what I really like about it, is every episode you have Dracula, psychic detectives, and ghosts, Easter Island Massacre, just lots of cool stuff. Stonehenge, really a lot of fun to watch, and it's exciting and interesting, and all the variety of topics. And one of my favorite things about when I originally was watching this series and then rewatching it on DVD and catching ones I've maybe never seen before, it's one of those that's a great catalyst to further exploration. It's something that I think the perfect thing about this is it's entertaining, but it's also something that might present something that you go further and really look up and get more information about. We have on HD DVD Planet Earth. Something that's just, it's a fun way of exploring between the different sections, all the different aspects of nature and life on this planet. And there's so many of these that I've enjoyed watching, something like David Attenborough, and just an incredible number of those over the years. They're a lot of fun, and this one is one that I've always just kind of kept in the collection and like rewatching. It's a good documentary series, but also because it is on HD DVD format. It doesn't have a ton of documentary kind of stuff, and it's one that it's a reason to drag out one of the HD DVD players and have some fun exploring that. And then getting into something else I've always found fascinating, because I'm a huge fan of Star Trek. I have been since my very earliest memories. So of course I want to know what's out there. I want to understand what I'm seeing on screen with these great stories. I want to understand that element of the storytelling and what they are exploring. So we have the planets. There's been a couple of different editions of this with Patrick Stewart. I actually had an interactive version, like a little bit older version of this one. This is like the 2000 release on my Power Mac that I had downstairs, our old Macintosh computer. It was kind of a cool look. It was very similar content, just a little more bit of a combination of that and the way the old like Encyclopedia Britannica like computer editions were. So that was a really fun one to explore. And then both versions of Cosmos. This is the DVD set with the original Carl Sagan series. Definitely one that I actually think I prefer this one. I like some of the, we have of course the Neil deGrasse Tyson, this Space-Time Odyssey, and this is cool. This is a cool update, some updated information. It's cool to see all the the crazy effects, and that's a lot of fun. Yeah, this is a great series to rewatch. But there's something about this one, the original, that I feel like I come back to more frequently. Something about it that is a great combination of feeling profound without feeling inaccessible. It's something that I think explores concepts that do have the potential to feel daunting or incomprehensible, but explore them in a way that feels very accessible and something that you can grasp even at a young age, and really just drives curiosity. And I think that it does that in a way that also doesn't feel like it is dumbing anything down. It just is something that's explored and explained in a clear manner that presumes that maybe you haven't encountered this information before, but doesn't presume that you are unintelligent. It presumes that you have the capacity to explore these and understand these, and just in a way that I find to be very beautiful. And I think that comes across in both these versions, but I think the original Carl Sagan Cosmos kind of does that a little bit better. So that's those, and just a few more to go through here. Just about done. Kind of the sort of oddball ones. Fitting a little more in the history kind of entertainment section, but we have Behind the Burly Q, the story of burlesque in America. This is really, really good. I like this one a lot. My wife really liked this one as well. Alan Alda does a really good job in a lot of this in particular. And it's fantastic, and it's something that I feel like, especially now, maybe not everyone's quite as familiar with, what burlesque was. They just think of, strip show. And really, I think this is something that would be a lot of fun for people to look into and really kind of see what it actually was and what else was there. And a lot of the origins of comedy, a lot of the comedy stuff that we love from the early days of TV and movies, coming from the origin in burlesque. And it's a chapter in entertainment history that I think is fascinating and should be looked into more. And then we have this documentary set. We have The Exotic Dances of Betty Page, another kind of look at, there's nothing here like too risque for you to back up to double check where I turned over, but it's really interesting, and look at the pinup models in general of the 50s, really focusing obviously on Betty Page, but a good kind of look back at a certain kind of pop culture era. And this series that I really liked, can't believe it's got a physical release from Netflix. The first 2 seasons, which kind of has everything I would want to rewatch, of The Toys That Made Us, going into the history of the toy lines for Star Wars, Barbie, He-Man, G.I. Joe, Star Trek, Transformers, Lego, and Hello Kitty. So really, like, the big kind of like toy franchises that changed the world. The only thing else I would put in here would be a little more like TMNT. Would be cool to have seen, but these are fantastic, and the stories are fascinating. Particularly, I think, Star Wars, Barbie, He-Man, and Star Trek. Those, I think the history behind those is really fascinating, and this has some bonus features, deleted scenes from the Star Trek episode. So this is a cool set that I like to revisit. That's a lot of fun to look into. And then one of my favorite presenters of all time, just really fascinating to listen to. There's tons of stuff to watch for free on YouTube with the amazing James Randi. This An Honest Liar, this documentary all about James Randi. And this in itself is fantastic, but I feel like one of the best things about this is that you watch this and you learn a little bit more about the man and what he stood for and what he was trying to accomplish in his history of his life. And it's fascinating, but then it encourages you to look further and find a lot of his lectures and his presentations and his TV show appearances, and some of them bring up some just fascinating points that really get you thinking. And it's a great documentary. And we have just 2 more to kind of finish off here. We have Pumping Iron, 25th Anniversary Edition, the absolute classic. This, along with Trekkies, was like the documentary that I would watch over and over again. My friends and I would watch this, and this, especially as like teenagers, and quote from it, and just a fascinating look into the world of bodybuilding, and the way Arnold plays with it as well is a lot of fun. This includes some in-depth interviews and some other kind of looks into the legacy of this documentary, and that is definitely a classic. And then one that is really special to me, I kind of saved it for last, we have The Orange Years, the Nickelodeon story. Nick was such a big deal for me growing up. Nickelodeon was the kind of kid-oriented thing that I gravitated towards. If I wasn't watching stuff like Star Trek or Xena or Hercules or reruns of old 60s shows on TV, I was watching Nickelodeon, and Nickelodeon was even the window into a lot of that stuff. Once I got to like Nick at Night, that was my window into a lot of my all-time favorite TV shows. But a lot of the original kid-oriented stuff from the late 80s through the late 90s for Nickelodeon, it was generation defining. And it's a documentary that really holds a lot of special meaning for me. I cried the first time I watched this, and it brought back a lot of memories of those years. I think part of it too is how much of it has been practically erased. A lot of stuff from Nickelodeon at that time period is virtually vanished. It's hard to find a lot of the stuff from that time period, and things like Salute Your Shorts or anything beyond the first season of Clarissa Explains It All. I have on like a bootleg Blu-ray and like VHS tapes that have been taped off TV, things like that, because there aren't official releases, and a lot of those shows and stuff from that time has just been is mostly gone, or you have to kind of find it unofficially. And watching this documentary and looking back on that, it really was impactful because of a couple things that reminded me of first that time period in my life, childhood and growing up, and both the good and the bad, but really reminded me of focusing on more of the good and the fun stuff, and friends and just things that are long gone, kind of reminiscing. But it also reminds me, and when I watch this documentary, I've watched it multiple times since it originally came out, of a time after that was not good, really in a dark place, and a lot of things happening with family and people dying, divorces, and that time period was also a time when I looked back and would focus on, I remember being happy. This is kind of an important time for that. So it reminds me of like both those times in my life, in a totally new stage now, and found happiness in a different stage of my life. But it reminds me of both happy portions of childhood, then also one of the things that made me kind of like go through, like to make it through one of the less happy times, was the memories of this kind of era of Nickelodeon. So really an important one for me. And that wraps up the look at our documentaries. Of course, there are probably 1,000+ hours worth of other documentaries that aren't in this video, because it's stuff with, you buy a lot of really good kind of collector's editions of movies or box sets of TV shows. Even last night I was watching a couple of really good documentaries on the Addams Family TV series DVD box set, and there's so many more like that, but these are like the bulk of our documentary collection, and stuff that I very specifically got sought out and wanted to have and keep in the collection and revisit, and it shows a lot of where my interests lie, and love to hear what documentaries you have in your collection, or see them if you have a video of your own, and what of these you have seen before. Which ones of these that you've seen in this video out of the many on here are your favorites, and maybe are there any that you'd like to know a little bit more about, or any that kind of piqued your interest you never heard of before, because I'd love for you to go out and explore some of the topics presented in these documentaries.